Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey.
Welcome to the Home Education Matters podcast, the podcast that aims to answer all your home education questions. You're here with Diane today, and today I'm here with Chris, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what he does, and he is joined by Dorothy, who may or may not want to speak, but she is here in the room with us. So Chris, hi, thanks very much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. I can, talk about this stuff all the time. So any chance I get to run my mouth, I'm more than happy.
Give us a little introduction to you and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Chris, and I'm a home ed dad for 3, ranging between 10 and 4. We've home edited since our honeymoon. We had that conversation. Should have really had the conversation about how strongly we felt about it before getting married, but on the honeymoon we had the conversation. So we home edited from the very start with ours.
So do you mean children?
We sat down in a Pizza Express and kind of like both let out our frustrations with the education system and stuff like that, and we both went, if we have kids, let's just kind of home ed. Let's do that thing.
Oh, that's great, isn't it? That you're both kind of on the same page with that.
Yeah, it's lucky, really. We are lucky, and the girls have really taken to it as well. And we come from Plymouth, down in Devon, and there is a very, very strong and active home ed community. I mean, we're in a place where you could do 4 or 5 activities a day every day of the week and still have more things to choose from. So we know we're lucky, and the community themselves are just amazing. There are some individuals who just put so much work into it, and then other individuals who just keep it all going. And it's a nice big community down here, isn't it, Dorothy? Yeah.
Dorothy's nodding there. Yeah, that's great. Makes such a difference, doesn't it? People kind of feeling that they have a sense of community and not feeling terribly isolated.
Yeah. I mean, us ourselves. So from the family side of things, I'm a big geek, massive nerd, and I love games and board games, and always been interested in how positive board games and games can be. Mm-hmm. I wanted to use Dungeons and Dragons with my girls, but assumed at the age, this is about 4 years ago, so Dorothy would have been 6, that it would be too early for her. I put it out there to the community, and we had a really positive feedback. So this was 4 years ago, pre-COVID. And I was going through the post yesterday, actually, and all these people jumping up, going, oh, yeah, we'd love to do it, and that would be a brilliant idea. And it started, and I started running 1 game, and then it became 2 games in a day. And then I went off to university as a mature student, went and did my degree in special educational needs and disability, and was working 1 day a week in a care home, basically working 1 day a week delivering role-playing games for kids, and seeing more and more how positive it is for both academic achievement and for inclusion for SEND.
Yeah.
And I decided, well, I can just, the parents love it. They would be happy to pay for these sessions. I will become a professional dungeon master, and started doing that, and dropped my 1 day a week at a care home. And I was doing my university degree, and we started running 2, 3, 4, and now we've got an office in a community centre, and we're running, I think we're up to 11 games a week now, home ed based. There's 2 DMs, and then we have a bunch of people who are kind of on 0 hours contracts, which we get in for when we do our holiday camps and the half terms. And we've kind of, this is our growth. we use Dungeons and Dragons for education. That's kind of our thing.
So I've got to ask, is Dungeon Master an official title?
Unfortunately, yes. This is something we can't get away from. Getting into it, so I don't know if you have any like real aficionados who are going to listen to this podcast or wherever it gets out there. So just to kind of wave my geek flag, I do know that the difference is like different systems have different names. Dungeon Master, Game Master, Storyteller. Originally, they were called referees. When the guy who originally co-created the game, the position was known as a referee. And then it became Dungeon Master. And that was cool for a while until, obviously, there's connotations that some people might see that word and
yeah,
go, oh,
absolutely.
okay.
That's how it was in my head.
Yeah, but I've kind of become more comfortable using it because the community are getting used to what it is we do. And that's been one of the biggest difficulties is explaining to people who have absolutely no idea what a role-playing game is and what it is we're doing. They know that the kids love it. They know that there are all these elements. We've produced a 3-page Word document on all the learning outcomes that can be achieved through Dungeons and Dragons. That's something that we're very slowly working on the website at the moment, and that'll be something that will be available and up just for people to have. We fully understand the struggles that can happen with like the LA and stuff like that and things, and when you need to evidence stuff. So if you need a little help, then we've got some documentation, and you can kind of crib off that and steal some bits and pieces if you need to. But it's kind of explaining what is a role-playing game, what is Dungeons and Dragons, and why it is positive. And that I found really hard. The best way I've managed to sum it up so far is it's a collaborative storytelling experience that uses maths to decide the outcomes of what people want to try and do.
Yeah, okay. So I think this needs, for me, definitely some unpicking. So your business is called Character Creation Role Playing. So that's where kind of people can look you up, and that's where people can find you. Is it your private business, or is it, what status does it have?
We are a CIC, so that's a community interest company.
Right.
We are. I'm like deep down at heart, I am a full flag waving communist and would do whatever I can to just live on a bit of land and exist. That would be my dream. Right. So we really don't. We're not after money and stuff like that. So everything that we make, as long as I've got a roof over my children's heads and we're able to eat, then everything goes back into expanding the business. And we do so many other elements to it. Like right this moment while we're recording this, upstairs in the community centre, we are running a board games day. And that's completely free for everyone to come. We've invested in over 300, well, I think we're 7 games away from reaching 300 board games in our library. And we host that all day. And people come in and they play board games, and we just have a real community atmosphere going on. So we do that. We also have 300 litres of loose Lego that we use for building. And we have 50 Lego sets. So when we do a Lego experience, the kids can either choose to follow the instructions and build the set, or they can just free build and have a challenge or those kind of things. So as a company, we've really kind of spread out for using toys and games for education, therapy, and community building. That's our elevator pitch, and that's what we do. But the main focus, because it's so popular and takes up so much of our time, is the Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. And your ethos actually comes through really strongly just by talking to you about how much part of the community you are and how helpful you're being and how inclusive you're being. That comes through really, really strongly. So for the
one of the projects that we're working on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. No. Sorry, I was just following that up. But one of the projects we're working on is to produce a document that anyone with no experience at all can download for free, get all of the resources for free, and start running Dungeons and Dragons at home.
Okay.
We would absolutely love if people were able to do this. Just small groups, family groups, things like that. There is material from the people who make Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, you can download for free. And that gives you the very basics in the start. We're working on that document, which will run over about 6 or 7 sessions, depending on how long your sessions are. And it will take everybody around the table from knowing absolutely nothing to having level 5 characters that you know what you're doing and you're able to really kind of delve into what element you enjoy the most about D&D.
Yeah, so I guess that leads me to my next question. So I'm a completely uninitiated person about this. So I'm not geeky at all, and really have no sense of Dungeons and Dragons apart from perhaps, what's portrayed in films or, kind of, what I've sort of seen in the media maybe. So is there a brief kind of way of just sort of summarizing what Dungeons and Dragons actually is?
Oh yeah, we can delve into it. Maybe we can start. Dorothy, what is Dungeons and Dragons? No. You've got nothing. Oh, okay. Normally you're just talking as much as Daddy does, and we get a mic in front of you, and we don't know what happens. Right. Okay. So, okay. Imagine it like a book.
Okay.
So, the adventure you're going to go on is like a book. Now, the dungeon master, the games master, the person who's running and facilitating the session, they're kind of coming up with the main plot. They're going to go, right, we're going to start chapter 1, we're going to go here. This is going to be our main antagonist, and I want to kind of get to the ending being about this.
Okay.
But then you get in a group of other writers to come in and go, right, okay, so I'm going to write for this voice and this character, and then someone else says, well, I'm going to do this as well. And then you sit down and you write the first chapter, and that's your first session. And then at the end of that, the lead author kind of goes, right, okay, well, they've killed off my main protagonist already. They've completely ignored all the clues, and now they want to go shopping. So the next chapter just becomes a whole chapter about them shopping, and then you can drop stuff in and you can evolve it and move it around and stuff like that. And it's completely open world. So everyone can work together to do whatever they want. And that's really what it is. Every player has a character sheet, and we have some set rules that we have to adhere to.
Okay.
Say that the evil goblin is attacking the party with a bow and arrow. You could choose to run up to him in your suit of armor and brandishing your great axe, swipe at the goblin. So you would roll a 20-sided dice. You would then add your to hit modifier to it. So you add them up, you tell the DM, and then he compares that to the monster's armor class. If it meets it or beats the armor class, then they then get to roll their damage dice, and that depends on what weapon you're using, and then you add your modifier for your strength, and then you say, right, well, I've done 8 damage to the goblin, and then the dungeon master then compares that and says whether you've defeated the goblin or whether the goblin's still got hit points left.
Okay.
And that goes through, and everyone gets a turn, and the goblin will do the same thing, or you can choose to fight at a distance, or you can be the person who heals the party. And that's just the combat, and that's just the mechanics of the dice rolling. There's also all the social interactions. So you could have a scene which is entirely about you've been invited to court, and the king is there, and he's paranoid and takes you to one side and says, I know there's someone here who's feeding information to our counterparts in another region. Find out who it is. So the entire session is the group walking around this majestic court trying to talk to as many people as possible to pick apart the threads of intrigue that are happening and discover who is passing secrets to the spy master from another kingdom. And you're like completely different sides of things. There you've got high-end combat, or you've got high-end social interaction and engagement, and you can mix it in between. So is that making any kind of sense to you?
Yeah, some of it went a bit over my head, it has to be said, but I kind of think I get the gist. Is this something that is done in person or online, or a bit of both?
So I am fortunate enough to be able to be picky on how I deliver my sessions. Mm-hmm. There are enough home ed children who want to play that I can say all of my games are in person. I am pretty sure that I could double or triple how many hours that I work delivering it online.
Yeah.
As a personal preference, I like the physical interaction because you get so much more from the game when you're looking across the table at another player.
Okay.
During lockdown, I ran games where all the kids were over Zoom, and it worked, but also there was a lot of playing computer games on the side. And not as much engagement, because sometimes the sessions can get drawn out when there's a big battle happening and there's lots of moving parts and things like that. You can run a game with 3 people and a scrap of paper and the character sheets. Okay. Or you can run a game for 8 people using online software that you have these intricate maps that you can purchase with animated pieces that move around these maps and all these kind of things. It is a game of you fit it to how you want to deliver the game and how it's best responded by your players.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Yeah, and I suppose while you were talking, what I was aware of is that, I mean, in my line of work, I use role play as well as a way of allowing people to inhabit a different kind of internal experience. And of course, that's what kind of actors do, isn't it? They inhabit someone else's internal experience in order to kind of work through some of the issues or some of the emotions that they might be experiencing. And I guess it's got the potential to be really quite powerful.
There is a lot of work going on at the moment into studies around using role-playing games. There has been for quite a while the use of the role-play element to explore therapy. And yeah, so it can be used as a tool for a lot of things, but I think one thing that I am very careful of is staying away from delving into those things too much, because I'm not a trained therapist. Obviously for home ed, the home ed community is such a vibrant and varying group of people that there might very well be some issues within a group that I would be made unaware of, and a parent wouldn't even think about talking to me about something that could be triggered. So I try very hard to make it a very black and white heroes versus villains.
Yeah.
I also have a very cut-off point at which they can fight things that have a moral consequence. So 11 is kind of my My grey area is 11, and then anyone above that, they're just playing D&D as it's printed in the books. We have some moderations. There's a very, very famous D&D campaign called The Curse of Strahd, which has seen many reprintings and has been pulled over the coals about a lot of things, such as the representation of Romany culture. That was something that caused them to have to make a reprint, but they kept in a lot of stuff that is very triggering for people who may have issues with abusive relationships, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's one that we don't run, because you've got to really know the ins and outs of a very thick campaign book to be able to know when you're going to turn around a corner and you're going to read something out, and then it's going to be like, oh wow, okay, that's an issue. But everything else is we deliver as printed. They fight the goblins, they fight the evil bandits. There might be a grey area with a wizard and stuff like that. Below 11, everything they face is animated suits of armor and stone monsters that have no communication, gelatinous cubes, these big blobs of things that they just are reactionary to their environment, and they eat things by swallowing them whole and just digesting them over months and years. So I try and keep all of those kind of moral grey areas until they're much older.
Okay. Yeah.
So makes any kind of sense?
Yeah. So there's something about navigating some moral dilemma type work for the slightly older kids.
Yeah, and then that can be delved in as much as you want it to. One of the things that I love about role-playing games is the kind of soft skills that you pick up, and oracy as well. So the spoken or the non-written side of the English language, or any language really, and how you can use D&D to really show people how different communication styles can be interpreted by different people. So in one scene, you're talking to the prince who expects the players to curtail and say, "Thank you, sir," because if they don't, he's going to get offended and they're going to be stuck to spend a night in the jail. And then the next scene, they're talking to the farmers who have a goblin issue, and they look up to them like they're absolute heroes, and they couldn't do anything wrong whatsoever. And how you need to talk differently to different people, because they respond better if you speak their language, if you communicate in their way.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing for kids to learn, isn't it? And I guess there are some cultural nuances about that, in terms of, should we be able to speak as we do and just have people accept us, or should we kind of really think about how we need to fit into these different situations in life and adapt our approach accordingly? And I think so that's a really interesting topic, I suppose, to get into with people.
Yeah, well, this is what I wrote my dissertation for my degree on, was the use of role-playing games and oracy, and that's hopefully what I'll be following up with my master's.
Oh,
so we'll see. Yeah, if I get around to getting the application in time, I'll hopefully in September be working on my master's, and that's going to be looking at increasing vocabulary using role-playing games.
Wow.
And yeah, that's one of the things that you can just tailor fit a game towards. If that's your goal, then you can quite easily make it work.
Yeah. And so do you know anything about whether Dungeons and Dragons is played in other cultures, or using other languages, or in kind of slightly different ways to how it is in the UK or the States?
To be fair, no. I've not really looked at the cultural differences in the use of Dungeons and Dragons. There is, even within the UK and like, so the English speaking West world, because I know it's quite strong in Australia and things like that as well. The Dungeons and Dragons itself is one game within the kind of rainbow of role-playing games, and there are some really well-known and well-respected games. So to name a few, we've got Call of Cthulhu, which is based on Lovecraftian horror. We've got a Vampire the Masquerade, which is based on modern day horror. And that's something that I don't run for kids, because that is very much, you're the bad guys.
Yeah.
No matter how good you're trying to be, you're still a blood-sucking vampire. And to survive, you need to feed from innocent people. So that's something that we don't run with underage kids, but it's a very well-respected game. There is a version where you're a hunter and you go out and hunt these things, which I'm hoping to adapt and change a little bit to make more accessible, and kind of like a Scooby-Doo version of it, which would be quite fun, where the kids kind of go into a haunted mansion or a carnival or something like that, and they've got to unmask who's doing it and things. And there's a lot of cool stuff there that we can do.
Yeah.
And then not just that, but intellectual properties have role-playing systems. So Star Wars, Star Trek, My Little Pony.
Wow.
Yeah, you name any intellectual property, and I'm pretty sure I can find a role-playing game in the last 30 or 40 years that was based on it. They based it and used that.
Yeah.
So role-playing games themselves can be used for so many different things, and Dungeons and Dragons itself did something very, very clever about 10 years ago, and they stopped building a game which was built towards nerds and gamers, and they decided to produce a much simpler game, and that led to this resurgence. And it kind of happened at the same time as things like the Big Bang Theory and comic books starting to get more of a show, and all this kind of geek culture started to rise to the surface, and people found D&D to be very easy to start. They came out with the original starter set for, and we're on 5th edition now, so we've had 5 odd different versions of D&D since it was originally created back in the 70s. And they had the starter set, which had a story called The Lost Mines of Phandelver. And that's so, the first couple of pages of that really take a group of people who have no idea what's going on by the hand and say, right, so you assign someone to a dungeon master and they're going to need to read this, but let's play together. And it tells you what to do and gives you that confidence from the first session to move forward and to learn how to play. And it really has pushed Dungeons and Dragons to a peak of pop culture and social acceptance. We in Plymouth have, I think at the last count, we're up to something like 20 venues that either stock Dungeons and Dragons material or you can go to play Dungeons and Dragons. And that includes communities that pop up in a pub once a week and stuff like that. So that is a lot, and it's tailored to fit people. And then obviously those groups then split off and they try out the other games, and you get a group of people who are interested in one intellectual property or really want to play a game where they're the bad guys, and that's something that you can explore and do.
Yeah, the kind of, the geek culture, as you refer to it, it's really, really come on strong, hasn't it? And it's really cool now, isn't it? It's really cool to be a geek now.
Yeah. I think the Marvel movies and comic books kind of push that forward, and you see people walking around now with comic book t-shirts just as much as you see football shirts and things like that.
Yeah, and my home educated daughter Rosa, I think she's definitely in that geek camp. So you were talking about
we'll have to
Yeah, I'll bring her along. I think she'd love it.
If you want, I am more than happy to run an online one shot. If you've got a couple of hours, one afternoon or evening, 4 to 6 players, and we can play some D&D. We could record it, and you can put it out as a bonus if you want.
Well, that would be great. Yeah, that would be really super interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, like Oracy is a big part of this, and that sounds like the area that you're really interested in. And I think that sounds really important actually for these kids who, we're calling them geeks, but for want of a better phrase, these geeky kids who actually in general society, they don't have much of a voice, do they? They're the kids that are the quiet kids generally,
Yeah. There are so many positive things, but one of the great things that I always quote is, no matter how bad a day you're having, mental health wise, or dealing with any kind of like being on the spectrum or anything like that, even if you can't people that day, you can still turn up to a game and you just hide behind your character sheet. You don't have to interact with anyone as yourself. You just interact as you're playing a part, you're rolling the dice, and then you leave and you go home. And you've managed to get some social engagement, and you've kind of got out of the house. And that works for both children and for adults. And I've seen it have a positive mental attitude so many times with both children and adults. It's a really powerful and wonderful thing, because at the end of the day, you're just playing a game.
Yeah, there's something really touching about that, actually, isn't there? That you can just come along and just, as you say, be your character, and you don't have to interact in any other way. There's something actually, really quite lovely about that, I think.
And it's also really inclusive as well, because you can have one player who comes to the table and they're a gamer, and they see their character as a list of numbers on a character sheet. And they do the most optimum thing possible, and they move around the board, and everything's mapped out, and they're playing a computer game. Right. And then the person sitting opposite them is more of a kind of drama kid, and they don't care what's optimum. Their character's going to jump up onto the ceiling, swing on the chandelier, land on top of the bugbear's head, and blind them with their skirt. And both of those are valid ways to play the game, and they can both play at the same time, as long as the DM is able to kind of marry up those two elements. The mechanics work exactly the same, and those two players who socially may not have met and got on get to spend that time together. And you expand your social network, and you gain friends who you have these adventures that you went on, and you've had these stories and these shared experiences, and it enriches your friendship pool and your social experiences.
Oh yeah, that sounds really, really lovely. Yeah. So do the children kind of volunteer to be the kind of the person in the DM, or is that allocated in some kind of way?
So it's when I run the games, I am the dungeon master, and I facilitate the entire game. Right. We do run an evening once a week, which was funded by Great Western Railway. Oh. To offer a peer-led session, and that is in the evenings, and that's open to the general public, and that's under 18s, and they come and they run their own game with us monitoring the content to make sure that nothing happens, because you are open to a lot of dangerous situations if people aren't aware of what they're doing. Okay. So one of the character classes is a character called a bard, and they're a charismatic type of person, and they use their words and their looks and their personality to achieve great things. And the kind of the meme, the stereotype that goes around the internet is that the bard seduces everything. So once the kids kind of get into the wider world of D&D and you see all these kind of things, and then you get a situation where you've got a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, and the 13-year-old, right, I'm going to seduce the barmaid, and then they start role-playing that out and stuff, and it can be a little bit on the kind of, that's... Yeah. So we kind of we put boundaries in and we make sure everyone's following boundaries.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to be able to run a game and also to be able to include people. So it's hard sometimes when you've got some players to be able to make sure they have their moment and their time within the game, especially when you have some other players who are a lot more vocal. And they're very used to commanding a room or a group of people, and like, you do this and then you do that. And then you kind of, as the dungeon master, you need to guide that experience and make sure that other people get their chance to kind of, well, my opinion is valid and I think this. And I've worked with groups where you start off and the group is very lopsided or even one-sided, and then you get someone else and they kind of have a social, they butt heads over words and where the party goes, and through guiding them and exploring, having a conversation and a debate, they kind of take that on as second nature. And I've seen groups go from, well, we should do this, no, we should do this, and they divide the group and they go, no, you should come with me, to the point at which they're going, well, I think we should do this because this, and this. And then the other person turn around and going, well, I can understand what you're saying and I appreciate that, but also, have you considered that if we did this, then this, and this might happen? And they come to a compromise, or they go, actually, you've won me over with that debate. Yeah, I agree with you.
Like the make up your own dungeon thing.
Yes, making your own dungeons. So thank you, Dorothy. One thing that I do throw in every so often is I will give the players a chance to be the DM. And what we'll do, we'll spend half a session and they can sit down and they can go through the monster manual and what kind of things do we want to pick out and throw at our players. And they'll sit down with pens and paper and they'll draw a dungeon and stuff like that. And it will start with just one room as part of a dungeon and then move on to full dungeons. And to be honest, some of the stuff that's come out, I'm working on publishing for free because they've just been so amazing. And you see who goes first, and then that person, you take them to one side and go, right, what have you got? What have we got? And they kind of come to you with a thing, and then you go, oh, that's cool. So what we'll do, we'll balance that a little bit, and we'll make sure that you're not going to completely obliterate the party in the first room. Let's throw in a trap here. What kind of thing do you want to explore? Should we have a puzzle? Okay, let's have a look at, you want a puzzle, so let's look up, is it a word puzzle? Okay, so we'll Google some word puzzles, and you work very quickly with these players to produce it, and you guide them, and they sit and they play the monsters and they say what's going on. And yeah, that's my style. One of the most important things that I always stress with people with D&D is never let anyone tell you you're playing it wrong. As long as everyone is safe and having fun, you are playing it right. Whether you're following the rules or not, it doesn't matter. You're just not following the rules that the other person is following. There are internet spaces where there will be flaming arguments of the interpretation of a spell. And they've had to go to the people who created this current version on Twitter and go, look, can you settle this? Because it says this, and this, but that doesn't happen. So how is this possible? And then they will have to wade in and go, right, this is what we meant by the rule, but we can see now that it is interpreted like this. So you have rules as written and rules as intended. And you can interpret the rules. I've just found out that for the past 10 years, I have been doing a certain set of spells wrong. And I looked it up and I I corrected myself, and I've turned around to all of my players and said, look, I'm really sorry. I've been doing this wrong. So from now on, we're going to use the right rules. And that's one of my big tips to learning to DM is be honest with your players if you're new and go, I don't know everything. And I'm not going to bog down the game by looking up all the rules every time we come up to something. So I'm going to make something up, or I'm going to take advice from someone else, and then we'll play it like that for today's session. And that'll be my homework, will be to go and look up the rule. And then next week I'll come back to you and I'll explain how it works. Once you do that, especially with kids, they really respect when you're honest and you go, I don't know everything, but I know how to find out everything. One of the other things we run in our sessions is I have the internet and we have a big screen TV that we can all see. And if an interesting topic comes, like the other day it was Pompeii. So we spent like 20 minutes researching Pompeii and finding out about the kind of statuesque things of the people that were left and how it's been uncovered and what happened, and the Vulcan god, not the Vulcan god, the Greek god or the Roman god Vulcan and stuff like that. And we kind of looked into it and just kind of showed how to do a little bit of research on a topic that becomes interesting. And that's another element that I fold into what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can hear so many kind of skills that you're helping these kids to develop, this sort of the flexibility of thinking, for one, which is really, really important, isn't it? And negotiation, leadership. You've just talked about research. And I know at the beginning you said that what you really helpfully do is help home educated parents realize how Dungeons and Dragons might map onto some of the more kind of conventional lessons and expectations of the local authority, for instance. And you talked about maths specifically, but I'm guessing there are all sorts of things, as you've just described, with thinking about Pompeii.
Yeah, you can another thing that, like, if I had all the time in the world, there would be so many projects that would be completed by now. It would be amazing. But one of the things that I really want to do is work with experts in certain fields to produce modules and campaigns. So they're the things that you play that are pre-written, based within historical times. So if you were doing a module, if you're doing a project on the Romans, well, here you go. Here is a module of an adventure that you can take your kids on over so many sessions that they will kind of experience a little bit of what it's like to live in Roman times. That's one of the things that you can twist and turn D&D about. If you want to address a certain topic, if you're doing the Titanic, then go and grab a map of the Titanic and use that as your giant ship that you want to host it on, and then they can go and explore what it's like. I never say I'm a teacher because I'm not a qualified teacher. I haven't done my PGCE. I have a degree in education, but that's from special education needs and disabilities side. So I don't teach anything, because I think the word teaching is a very loaded thing and can start a very strong debate between people who spend a long time academically getting to a position where they can call themselves a teacher. But what I do is I facilitate the opportunity for children to learn and to practice. So the maths that we do in D&D isn't very expansive. But you can make it work. You can put in math puzzles. You can do factions. Like the other day, I was watching. We've got a big whiteboard in the middle of our gaming space, and it's got a perspex screen on it, and we can use whiteboard pens to write on it. And they were doing long division because they'd achieved so much gold from doing a job. They needed to split between 6 people. So then they had to divide it by 6. And one of the kids was showing another of the kids how to do long division. And those things are just beautiful elements when those children kind of like, they take the teaching and share it. But one of the great things about D&D is the confidence in fast, simple maths. I have a lot of children that come to me that won't do any maths or won't do any reading. And I'm a little bit mean sometimes. And I'm like, well, if you're not going to tell me, you can't play. So you roll a 20-sided dice, you add your modifier, which is a simple number between usually -1 to something like 5 or 6. And then you're going to add that random number that you generated off of a 20-sided dice to it, and you're going to tell me what that number is. And to start with, that they lack confidence, and they might have someone next door to them going, oh, well, it's this, and trying to speed up the game a bit. But after a few sessions, they kind of go, oh, no, I can do that. I can add 4 to 11. And I know it's 15. That's fine. And then just getting that little bit of confidence kind of helps them. It's not replacing a maths tutor. If that's something that you need to do and you need to get your child into doing those things, yeah, it's not going to replace a workbook or something that is structured and scaffolded to teach reading, but it's going to get them used to seeing those words and feeling confident to speak in front of a group of other peers and say, this is this thing, or that is that. And I think that's a very important thing. When they're playing a game, they want to play the game. So they adapt and they accept, okay, I've got to do a little bit of reading, or I've got to do a little bit of writing. And it just becomes a safe space for them.
Yeah. And when you were talking, I was thinking, actually, it's, when you think about the stages of education, you're not a teacher, but actually, it's something almost higher level than that, isn't it? Because when you think about things, when kids are at school, for instance, it's very didactic teaching, isn't it? The teacher teaches and the children listen, and then, in some kind of way, they'll try and consolidate that learning and that listening. But actually what you're doing is much more, or it strikes me, is much more kind of collaborative, project-based learning almost, which is actually, those kinds of skills aren't usually actually taught until people are at university.
Yeah, and you can structure it however you want, because it is your personal private thing, and you can run it for just your family and have a couple of players. You can have it peer-led. You can have it inter-age mix. So when I run games, I tend to kind of class within maturity and experience. So I'll have games for like 6 to 8 year olds, and then kind of 8 to 11, and then 11 to 13, and then 13, 15. So that's kind of my rough areas. But obviously some children get on better with older kids, or they're at a point where they're kind of like, look, I'm fed up with the mucking about and just sitting here and having to be wrangled. I need to go up to a higher group. And like my games that I run for my middle child, who's 7, that is a lot more of a storytelling thing. And we do an hour. And if I can get an hour out of them sat around the table, then I'm happy with that. Whereas with Dorothy, who's 10, we do 2.5 hours. And we have a couple of breaks in between. And I have to gauge things as to kind of like, right, this is all getting a bit kind of slowed down because everyone's getting turns and it's all getting a little bit difficult. So we'll have more breaks. And then sometimes it'll be like where everyone's into the story and it's a really big story and they're on an adventure and they're only doing a couple of checks every so often. So we'll go all the way through without a break. And then I have my teens and stuff, and they would play all day with no breaks, eat their lunch at the table, and would be happy with that. If we're in the zone and we're playing, but then also I can trust them to have a bit of a side conversation and to be a little bit off, but they're also keeping an eye on what's going on, and they know what's happening. So we deliver it in so many different ways, and then that is something that is private to the group of people, and it goes for all players of role-playing games. Not all role-playing games are for you.
Yeah.
And you can, so say yourself went out and wanted to play an adult game of Dungeons and Dragons, and you found a venue which is like, oh yeah, we do Adventurers League on a Wednesday. Come on down. We've got 6 tables that are running at the same time. And you go on down and you join a group, and you have one expectation, and the rest of the group are like, no, we don't play like that. We play very much like this. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just you haven't found the group for you, and you can't make a square peg fit into a round hole unless it's designed for that. So like I was saying earlier, as the dungeon master, I make sure everyone is included and everyone is balanced. But when you're doing it for fun, then some groups just don't, some people don't gel in the groups. And that can be something that can be absolutely right. So if someone's starting up their own home ed D&D sessions, just think about whether those kids are going to get on, and if they don't, that is fine. Maybe though they need to be separated, and you have 2 different types of groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned the kind of age demographic that you tend to work with, these kind of different age groups, the younger kids, the middle kids, and the teens. Are there any other sort of demographics that you notice about the kids that you work with, or that comes through quite strongly? Are they, in terms of like even gender based, what's it tend to be?
So more kind of working with mainstream children. So aside from what we do within the home ed community, I don't know if many of your listeners will be aware of the government scheme for children who have free school meals. But during the summer, Christmas and Easter holidays, the government hand out a bunch of money to the councils, and then the councils choose how they deliver their projects. In Plymouth, we have a project called Fit and Fed.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And then that's free school meal kids. And then they also have a little addition to the pot, which is for anything else to tick boxes. So within hours, our boxes are EHCPs, looked after children, asylum seekers, things like that. And they come to us. So we work during the holidays with a lot of mainstream kids, and it tends to be those children, because the home ed community kind of will try anything, and like, okay, it's Dungeons and Dragons, we're up for it. We go jiu-jitsu first thing, and then after that we go and play in the park for an hour, and then we come and do D&D, and then maybe after that we go and do lightsaber fighting or something. And most home ed kids are up for giving everything a try. They'll do football, they'll come from football to D&D. Whereas with the mainstream children, we see a lot of anime fans, and we see a lot of geeks and things like that. People who don't tend to have a lot of friends, and they come to us and they find their people. We also have a lot of teenagers who identify as they, them, or identify as a gender which is not their birth gender. That tends to be a very high majority of the kind of teens that we see coming in through from mainstream education. But also we get a lot of younger kids in our home ed who are coming in because it's that lower level education engagement. We don't see as many of the teen kids, but that could also be because my kids are very young, and the connections that we made within our local community were to those families, and I'm sure you can tell so far that if you get me onto this subject of D&D, I will talk your ears off, and I'll be very enthusiastic about it. And that kind of comes across, and people go, "Oh, well, we'll try it." And then the kids like it. And then, especially with our home ed community, some of the kids do it and they really enjoy it. So they tell their friends, and then their friends want to do it. So that is why we've got this thing. And with the older teens, that's definitely something that, like, once you're 14, 15, they can be running their own games. So if it's just for the social engagement that you're doing this teen thing, because maybe some of the teens are going to do their GCSEs, or they're doing a college access thing a couple of days a week or something like that, they've got that side of education met, and this is just the social, then you might as well just host a couple of teens in your living room once a week, and then they can run their own games, and then they're getting more out of it by being the dungeon master and things. Whereas when we are running the summer academy, we get a lot more kids who are just trying to fill their summer, and they're just trying to, like, that 6-7 week block that they've got in between school, like, oh yeah, okay, I'll come and try D&D, and they come and they love it. So it's a very strange and different demographic we get between home ed and mainstream. And also we appeal more from the mainstream to children who may have additional needs or be on the autism spectrum somewhere. And I think maybe with our home ed, we are more in that direction, but then maybe the home ed community is more skewed in that direction. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Are we getting more kids like that because there is a larger sample of those kids within our greater sample of home ed, or is it because we're attracting those kind of children? And it's it's a very interesting. I mean, I did special education needs, and I myself am dyslexic. I have anxiety and depression, and if I was tested, I would probably register somewhere on the autism spectrum. But being someone who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, it really wasn't something that was diagnosed at the time. So yeah, we different world then.
Yeah, and Eleanor and I have this conversation sometimes about the home ed community, sort of generally, about, how Eleanor's been home educating for quite a while, and she would say that when she began, it was very much full of people who did this as you did it with your partner, as a lifestyle choice. This is the life that we choose. But actually now it has shifted towards much more about, kids whose perhaps their needs aren't being met in mainstream school, and so their parents are electing to home educate them, which is the camp that I sit in my family. So my daughter was in mainstream school, and then her needs weren't being met, so we came out of that. So that I think the home ed community is shifting a little bit, because people are feeling that they're being failed by the education system in some way. But in terms of the mainstream kids, what strikes me is that, you're providing a real place of safety, actually, and containment for these kids that are struggling a bit and whose lives aren't perhaps how we would wish them to be.
Yeah, I know you can definitely see when we run these things that we have kids that turn up and will do like the entire summer with us. They'll be like, yeah, no, we just want to come and we want to play D&D the whole time, and they make friends, and very, very close friends. Like I said, they find their people that maybe are limited in their school in the year, because one of the things that I kind of look at mainstream education and I'm a little bit about is that whole kind of like, your friends are the people who are in a catchment area and born within 12 months of you. And that's where you'll kind of make your friends. Yeah. Whereas once you get into the real world, how many of us have had a job and then got an interest, and you've got one guy who's 30 years older than you, and then there's another woman who's just in her late teens who's started to enter your friendship group, and you have this wide and cacophonic kind of social group, which is very different to what you're expected to have in schools. And we kind of we give them a taste of that with our 11 to 16-year-old groups, and you do see these people making these lifelong friends, and it is over a hobby. Yeah. And also you can see some of those kids and you kind of think, well, I was there. That was me. And I know exactly what they would have been doing with their summer if they weren't here, is they would be on their computers and they would spend the entire summer just kind of interacting with pixels the whole time. And I'm so glad that we've been able to provide this thing, and kind of we have a very varied staffing group as well when we do these things, because we've got a retired midwife across to professionals within care and education, and students, university students, who all kind of mix and meld, and they kind of there's like one person could be like a bigger brother guiding them, where another person is like a granny figure, and it kind of gives them kind of safety within the network of what we do when we do these wider groups. And it obviously that's open to private bookings as well, and we get some of our home ed kids come in on that, and we do as much as we can.
Yeah, it really sounds like you provide such a welcoming space that's full of just safety and acceptance and inclusion. It sounds really, really brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, as long as people are here because they know why they're here. We've had some really terrible experiences where we get kids who it's just a crash for them.
Oh.
We haven't had it very often because we deal with 11 to 16-year-olds. It tends to be these kids are here because they want to be here. They're the kind of kids that could be left at home while you go to work Monday to Friday. That is not an issue. They can look after themselves. They can do their lunch, and then they're not going to get in trouble. But we have in the past, because we've been doing this is our third year. We've done the summer now, and we do 3 academies a year. And we have had the odd experience where we have a child who's come in who has no interest in Dungeons and Dragons and gaming and the culture whatsoever. And if they don't want to be here, we find it really hard to reach them. And that's where we struggle.
Yes.
So there needs to be, we create an inclusive environment, but the children who come need to embody that inclusivity and be open to everyone, because we won't tolerate people being insulted for whatever reason. That is just one of our fundamentals, is everybody is included.
Yeah, and that's really important, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
So we are Character Creation Role Playing. You can search for us on Facebook there. We have a website, charactercreationrpg.co.uk. It's very, very long, and I really need to tidy that up a bit. And then we're on Instagram as well, so you can follow us on there. We would absolutely love to offer more sessions and to teach people how to run games and all that kind of stuff, but time is limited. I've got 3 children and we kind of run this business, so I can only do as much as I can do. And if we can produce the resources to help people get into it, we would absolutely love to. But it's finding the time to do all those kind of things.
Well, it sounds like you're doing an absolutely brilliant job already. And thanks so much for coming to speak to us today. And just a reminder for everybody to like our podcast on whatever device, whatever channel you kind of listen to it on, and also like our Facebook group, which is also called Home Education Matters. It's been absolutely brilliant speaking to you today, Chris, and we'll be back with you soon. Okay, take care.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.